And you are live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to genre panel. One size does not fit all, thankfully. Finding your books home easy. So when a book doesn't fit neatly in a single box, we do. Well, our panelists know, and they're here there with us. Let them introduce themselves. So who would like to go first? I could call on somebody.
Just call on somebody.
Yeah.
All right, I'll go.
I think she's, yeah.
Yeah, Khan.
Go for it, Khan.
Oh, sorry.
So I'm Khan. I am the author of The Circus Infinite, which is my debut novel. It is a space fantasy. And I'm trying to frantically remember what I say in my bio. I used to perform circus. I used to play music. I've been a creative person my whole life. And I'm happy to be here. Well, is that enough?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Let's see. Would you like to go? Sunyi?
Okay. Hi, I'm Sunyi. I've written The Book Eaters, which is coming out in August in the US and the UK. I was going to say it's a different day, but they're both in August now. I'm an autistic biracial author and I live in the UK. I was born in the States. I grew up in Hong Kong, so I'm just kind of all over the place in every sense. And yeah, I write, I guess, kind of speculative fiction with thriller in it, and yeah, I'll pass on to someone else.
Kritika, you want to go?
Sure. Hi, my name is Kritika. It's pronounced like Ithaca, so it's kind of easy to remember. My debut book, The Surviving Sky, is coming out in October this year. It is an epic science fantasy, so there's definitely a lot of different genres kind of put in there. And it's a story about a husband-wife duo who are trying to save their marriage as they try to save their flying plant city from like crashing into jungle storms. So there's also a little bit of romance in there. So I'm super excited for this panel because I do a lot of like genre blending in my own work, and I'm excited to hear from everyone else too. Thanks.
Wonderful. Phil, would you like to go next?
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Phil Parker, and the novels that I've written are on the wall behind me. When I decorated my study earlier on this year, it was seemed like a good idea to do something like that. Mostly fantasy for the most part, but I've also recently moved into doing some contemporary fiction as well, which is why I thought it might be interesting to be on this panel. So completely different from doing sort of fantasy, but even my fantasies are sort of multi-faceted in terms of having a little bit of science fiction as well, because I use sort of interdimensional portals in all of my stories. So there's quite a bit of a sort of a mixture there. And my first trilogy, which are these on the wall here, I published in 2018. And I've just about managed to get a book out a year after that. I self-publish as well, perhaps I would just say too. Okay.
Sorry about that. I muted myself. Oh my goodness. Rain, help me out here.
Right, I'm Lorraine Wilson. I'm in Scotland at the moment. I generally just say speculative fiction influenced by folklore and the wilderness, because that kind of is a nice big umbrella term, isn't it? But my first book, which was out last year, is kind of a dystopian thriller. My second book coming out this summer is a dark folkloric sort of family drama. My next book is a slightly speculative literary, it's being marketed as, although I could talk about the term literary, that might come up later perhaps. And And so, yeah, so I write across a lot of genres under that sort of big umbrella. And I'm an ex-conservation scientist, so that feeds into everything I write. That's why the wilderness is always there. And I'm really looking forward to being on this panel with you guys.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And my name is Jessa Forest. I'm the author of which is a contemporary horror portal Lovecraftian madness thing and speculation, a standalone series of short stories that spans the genre spectrum of speculative fiction. Let's get into the questions. So a little bit of backstory from you guys, and sorry if I'm going in and out again. What made you want to be a writer, and what inspired you to use multiple genres in your stories? So Sunyi, would you like to head us off again?
So a bit weirdly, I wanted to write because of reading book reviews. I used to read a lot of blogger reviews and book reviewers. And I think there's one reviewer in particular, Matt Hilliard, he still writes for Strange Horizons, that he wrote like this 5,000 word review of this book, just like taking it to pieces. And I got to the end of that and I thought, that is so amazing that someone has written a book which has inspired someone else to write a 5,000 word essay. Like, that's incredible, you know. So yeah, reading reviewers made me want to write a book. And for going across multiple genres, I read most genres. So I like crime, thriller, fantasy, sci-fi, science fantasy very much. It's probably my favorite. And YA, adult, middle grade, it's all good. It's all great. And I think every genre has something to teach. And I think as well, because speculative fiction tends to be defined by setting rather than plot structure, you can get a lot of different types of novels with spec fic. And there's just a lot you can do with it. It's got a lot less restrictions than some other genres, which is a great thing.
Oh. Let's see, Phil.
Oh, okay. So I was just thinking that what Sunyi just said is exactly what I would have sort of said as well. I completely agree. There was some stuff on Twitter earlier on today about speculative fiction and its power, which I sort of retweeted and quoted from. So completely agree with everything that's just been said. I started writing when I was a kid, and as you can tell from this mess here, that was a very long time ago. It was really a case of starting off with Arthur C. Clarke, who was the guy that inspired me as a teenager, and so a lot of my early stories were very much sort of built on the same lines. And once I sort of got the opportunity to write, then I began to do it as much as I possibly could. But also, like Sunyi, I've read sort of speculative fiction books for the whole of my life and absolutely love them. So getting involved in doing that sort of thing as a writer as well as a reader has always been the thing that has given me enormous amounts of joy. And I think to answer the second part of the question of the sort of inspiring of genres, it was very much a case of, as I said, Clarke first and science fiction writers after that, and discovering fantasy, broader sort of speculative fiction after that, just simply by thinking, oh, this looks good, I'll try this, and seeing where it goes from there.
Awesome, thank you. Con, would you like to go next?
Sure. I was, I devoured books as a kid. My early readings in genre fiction were, I think, pretty typical for a lot of writers of our genre, or genres, the Narnia books, Lord of the Rings. But, as I entered my teens, I was a big fan of Lois Duncan, who is, I think, a foundational young adult writer whose works, I think, are sadly being lost to the mists of time right now. But she did a lot of really interesting stuff with horror in particular, in the young adult space. And so those were the books. Oh, and of course, the other book that really inspired me to want to try my hand at writing myself was The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. So not really a genre book at all. So those are the stories that kind of inspired me to try my hand at telling the stories in my head myself. And as far as I always loved sci-fi and fantasy, so I kind of naturally leaned that way when I started writing. But in terms of mixing genres, I in some strange way, I feel like I'm kind of wired to appreciate mashups. I just really like cross hybridization in multiple art forms. Not just genre like we're talking about. So like, for example, in music, I love when people do acoustic folky covers of songs that are not, that are like heavy metal songs or like dance pop or something. So, I mean, it's just as a kind of, obvious example, but, and I was an avid attendee of performing arts my whole life. And, I loved musicals as a kid as well. And musicals, are a blend of theater and opera, operetta. So, I mean, so the things, the kind of creative outputs of humans that I tended to gravitate to are always things that have mixed different disciplines. So, and that's totally influenced my imagination and writing.
Wonderful.
Now you said music, blending different music styles. I've got Nirvana's Unplugged album going around my head, the Jesus Don't Want Me for a Sunbeam song, which is just the most beautiful transition of songs. But anyway, that's a total tangent, sorry, very irrelevant, had to get that in there. So I'm completely different in that I came from science. So I'd read, obviously, all my life and was always a complete bookworm, but I worked in research, conservation science for years, kind of various parts of the world, and then got sick basically and developed disabling illnesses, which meant that I couldn't keep up that job. But I knew that I needed something that would stop me going kind of around the bend slightly, being stuck at home, with nothing but my health to sort of spiral around. And writing was kind of the obvious thing to try and, give it a go and give me a sense of focus and a sense of challenge, and something to sort of work towards that could still fit around my health and my child and all that kind of stuff. And I'm so glad I found it, because I fell in love. And it's just, I feel so lucky that I found that in what could have been a bad sort of time of my life. And the community and the art form is just such a lovely thing to have in my life now. So yeah, I think slightly different journey to a lot of people, but in terms of writing across genres, I think it was Sunyi who said I read across genres. So it's always felt like a very natural thing to not plan a story according to a particular box. It's, for me, when your inspirations are coming from all sorts of areas, it feels natural for the stories to be organic in that way as well. So yeah, and I think, a lot of us, childhood influences probably carry on into adulthood as well. And my childhood influences were things like Ursula Le Guin, but also Solzhenitsyn and Jane Austen and, that kind of stuff. So a mix, and the mix has carried on. So I think it would be really hard to write to a particular pigeonhole. I think would be actually quite a struggle.
Okay, wonderful. Kritika, would you like to go next?
Yeah, but I mean, at this point, I don't actually know if I'm going to say anything new, because all my reasons are very similar to what everyone else has said. Wanted to write as a child, read a lot of work which was not exclusively any one genre, read really widely. I write science fiction and fantasy almost exclusively right now, but I didn't actually come to it until much later in life. I used to read a lot of thriller and spy novels and mysteries and lots of Agatha Christie and things like that. In fact, I actually came to science fiction and fantasy through Michael Crichton, who is not considered a fantasy or science fiction writer. He's considered more of a thriller writer. So that's the way I kind of jumped across to a genre which I now write exclusively in. And like Lorraine mentioned, just reading really widely. For example, right now I'm reading a lot of picture books because I have a 3-month-old at home. And just the kinds of things that picture books do with form and with structure, and just playing with how words themselves can be textured onto a book, etc. Like, to me, in my mind, that's just sparking all kinds of ideas that I would use for, say, adult science fiction and fantasy. So I think reading widely is something that is common to all of us panelists at this point.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Sunyi, would you like to go next?
You're muted, Sunyi, but I think she's already.
I went first.
Yeah.
Oh, you did? Oh my gosh.
No,
I'm
no,
so
don't worry, it's
sorry.
fine.
Let's see. Khan, help me out.
Didn't we just, I just answered, is
You
there a new
did,
question?
yes. All right, let's see. Phil.
Yeah, I've done my bit as well.
I think you're right. I think I was the last
Yeah,
one
we're
to
all
go.
done.
Yeah, we need
All
to.
right, I did my
finish.
job, yes. Okay, so second question, do you pay attention to how much, like, the percentage of your work is in one genre?
I can go if
Yeah, go for
yeah,
it.
because I think Jess is freezing right now. I don't actually consciously make those choices at all, and I don't know about any one of you who does. Like, I think they just kind of bleed into my work based on the story and the kind of narrative that I'm trying to develop. And as we kind of talked about a little bit, I think my voice has developed over the last few years into the kind of stuff that I enjoy and the kind of stuff I don't. So my debut, The Surviving Sky, as I mentioned in my introduction, it has mystery and romance, but its true tagline is that it's epic science fantasy with thriller pacing, and you've got like 3 or 4 genres in there already kind of put in. So I don't actually think of like a percentage, and nothing as mechanical as that, I don't think. But yeah, I mean, I'm interested to hear from others if if you do actually think of, this is how much science I want to put into, say, my science fantasy, or you kind of see where the story goes.
I think the question got cut out. Sorry, I think the question got cut out, did it? So the full question, I'm guessing, was like, do we think about, when we're planning, do we think about exact percentages of what genre which genres we're combining in our work? Was that the full kind of, yes, or do we just let it happen and assess it afterwards? That was the full question, I think, wasn't it?
Yes. Can y'all still hear me? I'm so sorry. Okay, good. Yes, that's exactly right.
I mean, I do think about it, just to, I guess, through a different perspective. And I'm going to sound really mercenary when I say this, but I think about it because I probably obsess too much about my target demographic and my audience. And when you write cross-genre, one of the things that happens is, I guess a book that I really love, so Echo Wife, which is a blend of kind of domestic thriller and sci-fi. It's by Sarah Gailey. Now, that book, because it's like a thriller with a very strong sci-fi premise, it's going to lose some sci-fi readers who don't like the thriller side, and it will lose some thriller readers who don't like all the sci-fi elements. And there's sometimes a fine line, I think, when you're mixing genres in that way, between picking up readers from another demographic versus like how many you've lost by having other elements in, if that makes sense. So I don't think in exact percentages, but I do think like what kind of audience am I aiming for? Am I aiming for primarily thriller? Am I aiming for primarily fantasy? How limited is the readership for people looking for this exact kind of mix of elements in it? And it's not something I would be like, it's crossed it's gone to 32% fantasy, that's too much, or whatever. It would just you kind of think about it in the back of your head, and it's like a sense that guides you, I guess, that I'm aware of. And I would stay mostly within fantasy, people who are willing to read fast-paced fantasy, for example.
Can I go next? Because I'd love to respond to that point. I think the reason that I became a self-published author was I got so tired of submitting stuff to agents and being told, yeah, great, but the trouble is, what kind of story is it? Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? And I was saying, well, no, it's a bit of that, and it's a bit of that, and it's a bit of that. And being told every single time, well, yeah, but how do you market that? How can we market that? What's it going to be? And it just, sort of finished up getting kicked back to me because it didn't fit into those nice categories, which is why, I've got a bit of an issue as far as traditional publishing methods are concerned. I think when I write a story, I start with my characters and I just see where they lead me. I've written a post quite recently about having a drama stroke acting background. And being an actor, I tend to sort of inhabit the characters, and I do that when I'm writing. So, if something happens to the character that they sort of finish up doing sort of something, like in my latest work where I'm focused on two detectives, then that's the way it goes. And I don't bother about genre categories or anything else. I just simply tag along behind the characters that I'm writing for and see where they go. And it completely and utterly ignore the genres because I don't like them.
I think there's definitely a discussion to be had, perhaps with a little bit later on about the whole marketing genre question. But in terms of, for me, writing is very much, as Kritika said, about it's the only thing I really think about is what works for the story and how real the magic or the speculativeness needs to be for that particular story. And that's the only question that I'm thinking about, how it, what works for that world. And then it's only when I get to the end of the book that I start panicking about what to call it. But now I kind of see that as a problem for my agent, not me. So I very much, it feels very organic to me. And I feel like, although I write in different genres, they're being marketed in different genres, they all come from the same root for me, and they just grow in different ways. So it's definitely a question I postpone as long as possible, which genre it fits in.
Kritika, did you have something that you wanted to add to that?
I did, yeah. I think for me, what I'm seeing in traditional publishing is actually a shift towards genre blending quite a bit. And I know there's a lot of say my work right now coming out. It's a debut, which is crossing genres. And I know Sunyi's work crosses several genres, which I've read, by the way, The Arc of Book Eaters. It is fantastic. Everyone should go read it and add it on Goodreads and, review it and all kinds of nice things. And I know other people as well who are doing just fantastic work when it comes to genre blending in traditional publishing. Not to say that, it is not different, say, from self-publishing, or it's not different right now in traditional publishing, but I do see a move towards it. Gideon the Ninth, for example, is just a whole blend of different genres just thrown in together, and it works, and it's fantastic. Essa Hansen's Azura Ghost, which came out this year, and Snowflake Gloss, which came out, I think, last year, is a fantastic look at different genres as well, and just how well, you can have space fantasy and almost like a literary edge to it, and just all kinds of beautiful things kind of thrown in together, and they just work so well. So I feel like maybe there's a move also with audiences kind of hungry for more and for different kinds of fantasy and science fiction, and kind of destroying the tropes and learning from different genres and kind of putting unexpected things. I feel almost like as a genre, speculative fiction has matured really well, that now it's looking for fresh things and new voices and all kinds of things, even if that means bringing in perspectives that haven't been read before, right? In this kind of more a space which was very much cis-het white, men for such a long time, and now you're getting these perspectives from a lot of different demographics. So I do think traditional publishing is making a move into that space. I don't know if we're there yet in terms of how rich it could be, and I don't imagine there's an end to how rich it could be. But yeah, I just want to throw that in as well, in case we have listeners who are wondering, if I'm writing this kind of book, is it not going to do well in traditional publishing? And I think that's not necessarily true. You just like my agent, for example, is almost always looking for genre blending books.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think there is a huge market for it. And, you know, you look at people like Bridget Collins and Natasha Pulley and stuff like that, who are marketed as more sort of literary reading group, but they're very definitely SFF stories. And it's so I think the question isn't whether there's a market for it. I think it's more about, for traditional publishing, they need some sort of narrow label because they need to know which bookshelf it's going to go on in a bookshop. And it's that reductive at the end. But I think there's absolutely such a growing market. And I think, yeah, the books that are succeeding are symptomatic of that, I think. Definitely.
I would go so far as just, oh, sorry, go on.
No.
Okay, I was going to say, I would go so far as to say that I think actually being cross-genre can help you in trad at the moment. I know it wasn't always the case, but it gives you different routes you can be marketed by, because the content of a book is separate from how it's marketed. And for an example, I would say, like with Book Eaters, it's being marketed differently in the States than it is in the UK. So in the States, it is marketed as a contemporary Gothic fantasy. And in the UK, it's being marketed as effectively mainstream. And it's because the publishers fixated on different things they thought would appeal to those kind of regional audiences. And I think, you know, there's like, I don't mean to sound, I know when I said I sounded mercenary before considering kind of demographics and stuff, but you kind of give yourself more options as well with cross genre, that you've got lots more people you can maybe reach if you can just kind of, if that's a concern to you, if you're not, you know, if you're thinking about marketing, you're thinking about it in career terms, I think it can be a good thing and not entirely just a downside.
I think this whole conversation is pointing out how much of the distinction and tension between different genres is driven by marketing. You know, it's driven by the folks in the publishing houses that are not on the artistic and creative side of the equation, but purely on the business end of things. But it does seem, I mean, I agree with what Kritika has pointed out earlier, that traditional publishing does seem more open to genre mashups now, which Sunyi also alluded to. And I think part of that is driven by the example of indie authors who are having success in that space, and thereby demonstrating that the readership is out there, and that the readers that are out there want or have a hunger for these kind of stories. And interesting to note that, I mean, at this point, I feel like the self-publishing world and the traditional publishing world are like parallel universes, not just in terms of the writers and who the writers talk to, but the readership as well. I mean, readers of self-published works, as far as I have gleaned from participating in various, you know, communities and stuff, seem to only read self-published work. And those books are marketed by the writers, not by the bean counters at the publishing houses. And I think that kind of, you know, says it all. I first made a run at becoming an author in the 90s with a work that blended mundane realism, which is what I call literary fiction, and sci-fi. And, you know, my agent loved it, but yeah, like trying to sell it to a publisher back then was like, they were like, what is this? And that kind of put me off writing, you know, for a long time. But now, to kind of tie this back into the original question, now when I sit down to write, I just write whatever. I just follow my imagination and go with the flow of the story while I'm drafting. But then when I sit down to do that first revision pass, I look at what elements are working the best, what elements are serving the characters and the story the best. And then at that point, I might make a conscious decision to skew it more fantasy or sci-fi or whatever. So.
Wonderful. And there's a question in the chat. How much marketing do authors think about in the writing process?
I can go. Well, I'm a planner, and it's funny because I said earlier that I tend to let the story kind of take its own narrative and shape and all of those things. But I actually do think about how the marketing is going to work, not in terms of like very nitty gritty details, but as Sunyi mentioned, like just the target audience in some cases. And because we're seeing such a shift now of audiences kind of moving across different genres, or people reading so widely now, I do a fair bit of thinking. I will say I also do thinking when it comes to genre, not just in terms of like science fiction, literature, etc., but genre as also a medium. And we're in this golden age of TV and movies where science fiction and fantasy especially is being adapted really well into television shows and movies, etc. So for the big screen or the little screen or a screen. And I think it's worthwhile sometimes, especially if that is where you want to go, to really think about how you're structuring and pacing your story in a manner which can make adaptation easier. So if you have a whole bunch of like tech elements and sci-fi elements and things like that, then it might be a little harder to actually get a studio interested in it, just because it's so much more expensive. Or if you have something which does fantastic like Murderbot, which I absolutely love, but it's also harder to adapt that in some ways, simply because Murderbot has such an internal narrative, internal voice. There's a lot that's happening behind Murderbot's head, right? And Martha Wells mentioned that as well when people asked her about adaptations. So I think, just to loop back to the question in terms of how you're thinking of marketing, I think it leans into a wider question of what you're thinking of in terms of audiences, and how do you define your audiences, whether you only think of them for like a book, or if you only think of them for a particular medium, and how you see your work kind of shifting one to another. I will say this, like and I've heard from a lot of other authors of color as well. If you are writing a fantasy or a science fiction book, or just any book with, only like, say, characters of color, which my book right now is, it is going to be harder for you to actually find studios, etc., interested in it, which sucks. It's awful. I hate it. But that's something that, we're living in this kind of age right now where we still have to grapple with those issues. It's something to be cognizant of. I wouldn't encourage anyone to change their narrative voice or to really think about those things, especially when they're writing and querying a book, because you don't know what can happen. And I would love to see more, representation across all mediums. But when you're thinking of market, you also have to think of your own identity as an author, oftentimes. And it's not as easy as thinking of just the genre, if that makes sense. I know I kind of threw in a whole bunch of different points in there. So make of that what you will. But as
Brilliant.
It's
not an easy answer at all.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So shifting back to writing craft for a minute, what genres do you guys have the most fun writing in? I know we talk about like, meeting reader expectations, or, like all this planning and research that goes into it. What do you guys just do for?
I'll leap in then. I don't know. I mean, I think I do love folklore, and I'm always, there's folklore present in pretty much everything I write. And I love discovering new kind of obscure little bits of folklore and weird little sort of tragic stories and dark, shadowy things. And building that into stories is really, really fun. But I also, I'm just editing a book at the moment that's quite surreal. And it's the most kind of fabulous, surreal, weird story I've ever written. And that's really fun too, just being a bit weird. And it's not rooted in folklore necessarily, it's just a bit odd. And that's, I'm having fun with that. It feels quite whimsical and odd, which surprised me how much fun it is straying away from the kind of folkloric element. So yeah, I would say fabulous random stuff and folklore for me.
Well, can I follow that one on? Because one of the things that became a really exciting avenue for me to pursue was just about 18 months ago, during lockdown. My wife is a phenomenal reader. She just consumes books, but very much in contemporary fiction. Doesn't touch speculative fiction at all, and said to me, you know, please write me something that I can enjoy reading. So I did, and finished up producing that, which I put together really quite quickly. It surprised me by how easy it was together. But then, you know, giving her draft versions and saying, okay, what do you think to that? And getting feedback like, yeah, that's, you know, really like that. However, you've got this great big sort of, you know, big dramatic ending at the sort of back end of the book. And no, we don't have that kind of thing in contemporary fiction. You're still writing fantasy. So the process of writing contemporary fiction is so different to anything else that became such a huge bit of enjoyment. Absolutely loved doing it. So much so that having just finished writing my latest fantasy book, I've already got another contemporary fiction going, which I'm absolutely loving writing it because it's so different. It's such a breath of fresh air. And I found that when I get stuck on on a fantasy piece of work, and I can't find, you know, sort of the way to deal with it. In the past, what I would have done was just agonize over it and call myself all sorts of names and hate the book and everything else about it. Now I just leave it and I'll go back to my contemporary fiction and write a little bit more of that until the back of my head here has actually solved the problem that I've got. And then I can go back to that again. So it's a case of swapping from one to the other. And I found that enormous fun. Absolutely love doing it. So I really recommend that to anyone that feels like going into a completely different genre and starting something there. So that's a completely different approach, I think.
Well, I'm really in space fantasy mode right now. And the next project I have on deck that's not part of the world of the Circus Infinite is what I would call more science fantasy than space fantasy. And a lot of that came from, you know, I mean, I spoke a little bit earlier about the books that inspired me to write. I did not mention superhero comics, and that's been a huge influence too. And I love writing about people with powers and that can do weird shit. Yeah. So that's probably somehow always going to work in to my stories somehow. I would love to do something more contemporary, incorporating those ideas. And I would love to write a murder mystery at some point. The Circus Infinite, actually, when I first was doing the world building for the universe, I had intended to write a space opera murder mystery. And that was the goal, but it wasn't working out. So then I just kind of shifted gears, but within the same fictional universe. So.
Oh, you're
muted.
I'm going to preface this answer, and it kind of goes for all my answers, that I come at writing from the perspective of I don't have other fallbacks. I don't have kind of like, you know, if I don't write, my kids don't eat. So I do think about marketing and genres a lot, because for me, it's not an option not to, if that makes sense. I think the best advice I'd ever gotten for writing, which was from Absolute Right Forums, is to write what's in your heart, but with your practical hat on. So write what interests you and what calls to you, but with an eye for how that's accessible to other people. And I think as well, when you're autistic and you have to write for predominantly neurotypical audience, you're already making big changes that you might not otherwise to be accessible to an audience who doesn't think like you do. So for me, making that next step to, you know, can I tweak a story to be marketable or not is kind of not a big deal. And so just in relation to the question, yeah, I think I read a lot of thrillers still when I can. And I think every genre's got something to offer. And if you can kind of learn, you know, if you want to write a good romance, you should read romance novels. If you want to write, you know, really good fight scenes, thrillers and stuff like that can be great for it. If you want to learn world building, sci-fi and fantasy is the place to go. So I do. I guess the thing I learned most from thrillers is they move beyond hero's journey, and I love that, because sci-fi and fantasy, we talk a lot about how we're stuck in hero's journey, and all our stories are constructed around it. And in thrillers, they're all about the kind of the reader's journey, structuring the stories so that the reader has the best experience, rather than focusing on what the protagonists and the heroes are encountering, and that's really cool to me. So. Yeah, sorry, Kritika, go on.
Well, what you said actually sparked something off for me, which is often, as you mentioned, like you have all of these like narrative structures which have been like used to death, honestly. And I find that when we're looking for originality, the best thing, and possibly like one of the easiest things, is to incorporate something from a different genre. Obviously, don't do it in a manner which is so, patent, like it will look a little fake if you're just kind of throwing stuff in there without any kind of cohesion. But I know that a lot of genre blending stuff that I've read comes across as being so wildly original, and a lot of it is original because it is taking things from multiple different genres and weaving it together. So if we have anyone in watching, anyone in our audience right now who is wondering how to go about doing this, if I would just say, of course, like read really widely, but especially if you're getting feedback in terms of, oh, this is reminding me of this and this is reminding me of this, and I don't see any originality, or even if you've been rejected either by beta readers or critique partners, or during query, etc. Although with query it's a lot harder to pinpoint why, but if you have been getting that kind of feedback, one of the things to look at is maybe you're just repeating what everybody else has been doing, and one way to not do that is to look at different genres and see what you can bring into your own work. So I just had that thought based off of what you said, Sunyi, about just hero's journey and all of these narrative types which have just been used so often.
Wonderful, thank you. Aside and with agents, if share and self-publishing, share a little bit with us about like your experiences with just interacting with other professionals in the multi-genre, when multi-genre is being considered, because I've heard stories of some authors, like they get along great, or other people are widely accepting, but others are not, and that rejection. So if you could speak to that. Rain.
I don't know. I think I've been really lucky in that I've had a really, I'm surrounded by a lovely community of writers who have been incredibly supportive of me. I've definitely encountered readers of my first novel who came to it expecting a certain thing, and when it didn't fit that certain thing, it kind of threw them for a loop and they didn't really know what to make of it. But I've had other readers who love that aspect of the book, and I think that you just kind of have to roll with those punches, that it's not going to suit everybody, and it has a readership out there, and for me the genre blending is the strength of it, and hopefully enough readers agree with me. That's not a problem. But in terms of other professionals, I think, there's a question about approaching agencies and publishers and stuff, but that's slightly different, I think, to the question you were asking. And I've been generally welcomed in my strange approach to genre by other writers, definitely.
Good.
I think from my point of view, the world of writing has been seriously enhanced by the way in which bloggers have helped, particularly again with sort of mixing genres, because there are so many bloggers out there who are so positive, so enthusiastic about people that do that kind of work, and have got enough network coverage, if you like, to be able to really broadcast the kind of things that are breaking sort of molds and sort of pushing into new territories, because there are so many incredibly open-minded bloggers out there in the speculative community, especially, who go beyond just simply writing a review. They're the kind of people who will help with doing sort of cover reveals, for example, when you're an indie author, and will take things like promoting posts that you sort of put out on your blog, anything in order to be able to sort of carry on encouraging you, using social media to do the same thing too. And when these people are doing it for free, they're not getting anything out of it at all. It's just simply because they love the whole width of the genre of speculative fiction. That's why they're doing it. They are, I've called them repeatedly, they are the lifeblood of people like us that are trying to do different things. And without them, I don't know where we'd go, quite honestly. So they are an incredibly valuable sort of commodity for writers like us. Absolutely brilliant people.
As I think actually most writers I've met have been really welcoming of other genres. I think writers like to see each other explore things, and we see other writers doing cool new things. We go, oh wow, that's awesome. I think within writers it's not an issue. I think within publishers, I don't know, and agents, for sci-fi and fantasy, you get a lot of freedom, really. If you just call something adult fantasy, you let the agent decide what they think it is or how they can market it or pitch it. And the same for the publisher. You can kind of throw a few titles out there and that helps. But I think if you look at a lot of the kind of people like Stephen King and folks like that, they're all over the place, really. I think as long as you have these emotionally relatable characters, writers and readers and industry people, and a cool idea and emotionally relatable characters, and the reader enjoys the experience of the book, you got a winner, and that's all you need.
I think just to add to that, I think in terms of readership, speculative, the SFF sort of fan base and readership base and blogger community and stuff is probably more open to genre blending fiction than any other genre, I would dare say, because we're a readership that are already open to the unfamiliar and the strange and the wonderful. So who better to be flexible about what they're looking for in story? So I think if you're going to stretch the margins of how a story works or what ingredients it has, this is the best community to do it in, definitely.
I kind of just want to quickly agree with what Lorraine said, because I think science fiction and fantasy is very much the place to explore. Like, by its very nature, it is exploratory, it is it is full of discovery, it's full of the wondrous, and if you can kind of bring that into your work, you will, I think, in many ways retain a lot of traditional science fiction and fantasy fans, but also bring in other readers. I know that this kind of experimentation can be a lot harder, say, in literary fiction, though they do, other forms of experimentation. I think they have very much their own narrative, which they tend to keep to in many ways. But science fiction and fantasy can certainly break the mold, and just for different audiences.
A big success in the literary world of a genre mixing book, of course, is Cloud Atlas. And I find it, which, I love that book, but I find it telling that his approach was not so much blending the genres as juxtaposing them. So the book contained many different genres, but none of them were blended necessarily. They just were next to each other. I find that telling in terms of the kind of mentality of a more quote unquote literary writer approaching genre than how those of us here might approach that.
Yeah, David Mitchell doesn't care, he just does what he wants. More power to him.
Wonderful. So in terms of presenting, sort of like what there's your perception of what genre is and the book you want to write, the story you want to tell, and then like, you know, the reader's accessibility to it. How do you guys use social media to you know, say not the go beyond promotion, but just like interact with say readers, or like what kind of posts or techniques do you use to further enhance the multi-genre aspect of your work?
I'm a total newbie as far as all of this stuff is concerned. I'm still.
That's why I'm asking. Me too.
I feel like I'm still kind of clumsily figuring it out. Although, and I'm being clumsy about it in public, so that's fun. That's good for my anxiety. But you know, it's funny. In terms of my use of social media, I'm not really considering genre or genre mixing really at all. I'm kind of taking a cue from like musicians, and you know, like promoting the work when it's time to do that, but more giving glimpses into the creative process and a little bit of like what my daily life is like, and just trying to communicate who I am as a person. I mean, that's kind of been how I've been approaching it so far. And until my agent or my publisher tells me, no, don't do that, stop doing that, I'm just going to continue on this path, and you know, see how it goes. You know, prior to this chapter of my life, I was a performing artist, and it's the same. It's the same approach that I took then, doing that whole different art form. So it worked for me then. So I'm trying it out now, and we'll see how it goes.
Anybody?
For me, sorry, didn't mean to talk across you, Jess. For me, gosh, isn't it dark in here? For me, I've reviewed books, stories, you know, that people have sent, and a lot of my writer friends tend to send me arcs that I then read and review on my website, and that's got me involved in communicating and forming relationships with other writers, you know, sort of all over the place, which is, Lorraine mentioned earlier on that there is such a huge positive writing community out there. And when I first started getting published in 2018, I think the thing that came with it that I've enjoyed more than anything else is making friends with so many great writers and bloggers that then have helped to sort of, you know, to sort of promote me. But I love reading other people's books. I love reviewing them because reading their work then gives me ideas. Sometimes it certainly also intimidates the hell out of me. But it means that, you know, I develop links with, you know, a whole bunch of the people whose names are on the list here that are involved in this debate now, and who are also involved in QuaranCon as well. So I think the sort of the book reviewing process has got me connected to all sorts of people that has just enlarged my network no end and just enriched it. I think that's the crucial point. I think it's enriched the network for me, and that's really helped my writing as well, and broadened my awareness of different kinds of genre. So, you know, to name two people, for example, that immediately spring to mind, Bjorn Larsen, who has had me giggling like an idiot over the last few weeks as I've been reading his book, but also people like, you know, sort of Travis Riddle and the kind of stories that he writes that are so wildly different to anything else. And I just love his stories for that reason. So I think book reviewing has become a real asset as far as I'm concerned.
Oh,
I think I just think I know we're running out of time. Sorry, I think I'll
You're
quickly
fine.
say Strad is less reliant on social media, and I'm not very good at it. So my goals on social media are to stay out of trouble and not torch myself on Twitter, and which is apparently easier said than done, judging by Twitter dramas. So because publishers don't sell to readers, they sell to booksellers and book bloggers and reviewers, and they rely on that kind of layer of middlemen people to reach actual readers. So social media is just something where I try not to take it too seriously, and I try not to end my career on it, and that's the extent of it for me. And if anyone reads the book because I'm on social media, that's a bonus, but it's not a goal.
Yeah, I'd say I'm probably about the same. I'm not particularly au fait with social media, but it's like I love celebrating my friends' successes and talking books with people, and it's a great way to meet other writers and connect with people. And that's kind of I'm probably not a marketing professional in that sense, the way I approach it, but it keeps me happy. So
Awesome. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, unfortunately, we are getting to time. I could ask you guys questions all day. This has been wonderful. Just a quick reminder, we do QuaranCon does have the anthology and lots of merch. So check out QuaranCon2020 website, and you can get find links to all of that. I'll have our lovely panelists give us their own social media and where we can find you online and buy your books.
I can go really quick because you can't buy my books right now. The other links are not yet, but you can add it on Goodreads. And I think the link is on the YouTube chat somewhere. So quick and easy.
Here you go. And I've just provided a shortcut. I've put my Twitter handle up on my name now. And if you go there, my link tree's on there. And I think it's actually on the link tree's on the drop-down menu for the YouTube video as well. But my books are there. I've got one coming out in August and one that's lurking behind me that was out last year. So come find me, come talk to me about books.
You can find the Book Eaters wherever, I guess, at the moment. Tor is actually running a sweepstakes giveaway on Instagram, I think. Otherwise, I think, yeah, just any indie bookstore that you like, or Amazon if you must.
My book, The Circus Infinite, was released just about a month ago, so it's a fresh release. It's available wherever books are sold, although I think a lot of bookstores you might have to special order it, depending on what kind of sci-fi section that they have. If you order online, I recommend going through bookshop.org, which is a way to have the convenience of the big company that begins with an A, but supporting independent booksellers. And I threw my Twitter handle up on my name, CosmicCon on Twitter, and there's a link tree on my bio there.
Thank you.
Phil.
As I've just put on the side there, if you go to Twitter and type in @Phil Speculates, that's me. I've got a Facebook page as well on the same thing. If you go to View Author Phil Parker, that gets me in Amazon as well. And I've got my books on in the paperback versions with Broken Binding as well, who's stocked my work. And if you haven't discovered Broken Binding, you really need to. They're a great bunch of guys who run a fantastic company that will get you some lovely hardback books in fantastic packaging. Quick plug.
All right, we got to wrap this up, folks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.